And besides Jacob Gill, who else was interviewed today?
Deshaun Lee, corner, and I believe it was Jennings Dunker, who's kind of become a phenom because of his hay baling, his Solon beef, whatever that is, the hay bale toss. He won't be doing that this year. It sounds like he had a little bit of a procedure on his shoulder during the offseason, but he does say he's ready to go football wise. And we ran through some of these weights the other day and how some of these guys have changed. Some of the older guys have actually lost a little weight. Some of the bigger offensive linemen. I think Dunker actually lost a little weight, and he kind of alluded to the fact that this is a really old group now. And I mean, a few years ago, we just kept hearing all the excuses from the apologists and even Kirk Ferentz about how young Iowa was up front. And even last year, we made the statement that's no longer an excuse. They're no longer young. And this year, there is 0.000% chance that anybody in their right mind can argue they're young and that's a reason why they haven't performed yet. I mean, if they come out, we've looked at the depth chart, Mark. I guess I can pull it up here since we're talking O-line. I mean, you look at the number of seniors and super seniors in this group, and I'm talking guys in their 5th or 6th year. So first of all, Logan Jones is a redshirt senior at center. Amazing that he's that old now, but he is. You've got Tyler Ellsbury, redshirt senior. Mason Richmond, redshirt senior. Jennings Dunker, redshirt junior. Connor Colby, senior. Nick DeYoung, graduate, double redshirt senior. He's in his 6th year. Think about that. These are a bunch of old dudes, Mark. There is no excuse. And it's not like they just have a few old guys and injuries. They got depth. They've got people right now. DeYoung, he may not start. I mean, he's going to be in a battle for one of those guard positions. I listened to your segment you recorded with Elliot Clough the other day, and he alluded to the left guard spot. I don't know if I'm not doubting Elliot on that. He could be right. Left guard, maybe it's right guard. But wherever he's battling, wherever Nick DeYoung's battling, he's battling. He's not a cemented starter because, we just ran through a bunch of guys who have experience. And, oh, by the way, the one guy I didn't mention, Bo Stevens, he's a redshirt junior. He's got a lot of experience. They got like 6 guys, Mark, 6, 7 guys that are all like 5th and 6th year guys, and they all have tons of experience. I mean, you can say it's bad experience, but there ain't no excuse now. And George Barnett's been around long enough now that we're done giving him the leash. He's only been here a couple of years. No, he got here in 2020. It's 2024, folks. This running game ought to be really good. And the fact that Liddell Betts managed to keep all those running backs together. We've talked about that because we talked about Jazz Patterson losing the weight that he lost and Kamari Moulton gaining the weight that he lost. The versatility that is Terrell Washington. If they don't run the ball effectively this year, it's a big-time indictment, regardless of, new OC. So what? I'm guessing the run game looks very similar. They're going to run some different. I'm sure they're going to have some different packages in place and some different schematic things that they'll change. But in general, there are no excuses, I don't think, for an experienced group of running backs, an experienced group of offensive linemen, and position coaches and a head coach, all that are supposed to be specialists who have been around the block and then some.
I'm going to highlight a failure of this offseason only because, out of respect for this football team, of how good they could be this year and how much they could accomplish, that they could not go out and get one, if not multiple, accomplished wide receivers in the transfer portal is inexcusable.
Well, they don't have equity. I mean, they don't, I'm not talking just by financial equity. I think they had some. I don't know NIL-wise what they were able to offer guys like Gill and Sullivan, but I'm guessing that was part of. Sullivan was a Big Ten starter at one time, so I'm guessing he was given some sort of NIL incentive. But, Mark, they don't have anything to bank on. Like, there's no collateral. They can't offer anything on tape. The receiver room has been so bad. And yes, I guess the one thing they can offer is opportunity at a Big Ten level and hope with a new offensive coordinator. And, I could see that argument if you're Tim Lester and you're looking at this and saying, look at what I've done at Western Michigan, and he should tout himself. Look what I did with Dwayne Eskridge. Look what I did with Sky Moore. Look what I did with who's the other guy that I always forget who transferred to Michigan State, the receiver that's now in the league. Every week I forget what his name is.
Jaden Reed.
Yeah, Jaden Reed. Why can't I remember that? Anyways, Jaden Reed. So he's got that to bank on. They tried to go after that Fresno State kid. All those guys were really small. We've talked about that. They didn't get the Fresno State kid. Maybe Gill is a bigger get than you and I think. I think he could be. Remember, Lester's never been able to be anywhere. He's not been in any place to have an opportunity at really recruiting that big. But the guys he's been successful at have not been highly touted kids. So maybe Gill ends up being this major diamond in the rough. The fact that they were able to land, they were able to land Sullivan and Gill. They happen to be roommates. That would be a really odd coincidence that Jacob Gill is just this guy. And they got him in part because of Sullivan's commitment. But maybe that's the case. But I agree with you. And here's the other thing. We don't know the potential with some of the guys that are on the roster because we saw Charlie Jones leave and excel. We saw Keegan Johnson. I know he struggled with injuries at Kansas State, but you have a Big 12 offense that offered and took him. And Arlen Bruce is another one. Never played because of the gambling stuff, but Oklahoma State wanted him. So I really do believe the talent level in that room is better than people think. I'm not saying it's top half of the Big Ten, but it's better than people think, and hopefully Tim Lester gets the most out of those guys.
Wouldn't it be something, and you've done a nice job of outlining, as you just did, but you've given a more in-depth look at what Tim Lester's been able to do with lowly recruited wide receivers out of high school and turning them into top 2 round NFL selections, that he's able to do that with, let's say, Caleb Brown and Jacob Gill, that they become.
Could you imagine?
And the offensive line's experienced and the running backs are
if they
really
do
good.
Here's the deal. And I don't think that's going to happen year one. Okay. I'm not saying it's ever going to happen at Iowa. It's just a different situation, right? If that somehow in La La Land, if we want to play those games and all of a sudden they've got multiple guys who are, playing like future draft picks, maybe even you get an all Big Ten receiver in there, the line comes of age, they're making the playoff. I mean, I really can say that with confidence. I think they're in the playoff at that point. I think the schedule shapes up too nicely. 10-2, I think, would get you in if your offense is that much better. And how much better is that? I don't know from a rankings perspective, but I think they're in.
Before you went that direction, it popped into my head that I believe, like me, you don't like making predictions early in the off season until later August camp, really get a feel for the team. But it'll be interesting to hear your final selection on a record and whether this team will go to the college football playoff.
I think it's ultimately very hard to make that, even though the potential is there for them to go 10-2, maybe even 11-1 if everything comes into place. The potential is there to do that. But I think it's going to be hard to predict because we don't know exactly what this offense is going to look like. We don't know what level of improvement it's going to experience. And then, this may sound silly to some Michigan fans and trolls that are in the chat, but losing guys like Cooper DeJean, who gave you not just defense, but gave you punt returning and gunning, and then you lose Torrey Taylor, those are big losses that we're not really talking about. And those have been such instrumental pieces in Iowa's record success, even though they've gotten, I saw some Twitter account today posted, did you know Iowa lost their 3 games last year, 92-0 or whatever it was? Yes, we know that. But in the wins, those pieces have been so important. So if like Reese Dakin isn't as good as we hope and think he is, and they can't find a punt returner, that hurts field position. Obviously, field position is what Iowa's been built on under Kirk Ferentz. So it's going to be hard to really put your foot down. I still think the 7-5 is it 7.5? Is that the over under from Vegas? I still think that's low. I mean, I'm not a betting man, and nor will I be. But that's incredibly low. I think I can tell you, I'm not predicting 7-5. They'd have to at this point. They'd have to have some immense like 2020 preseason scandal type of stuff to erupt here in the last month and a half before the season for me to even sniff 7-5. I think a lot would have to go wrong with the talent level they have back on defense.
They could lose to Ohio State. They could lose to Iowa State. Who else do they play in the Big Ten?
They get Wisconsin. They do get at UCLA and Washington at home. And then Maryland on the road late. Like I say, there's losable games in there. Yeah, there's losable game. There's always losable. This is a Big Ten conference. There's always losable games in there. But I just think, based on what Iowa does, pretty much year in and year out, it's hard to imagine them losing a series of those games. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
They could drop 1 or 2. Maybe they end up, 8-4. But I think 8-4 has got to be the ceiling, or excuse me, the floor. Where is UCLA in your? I know you don't do preseason power rankings. Where do you project them?
Low.
How low? How low in the Big
14 or 15?
Well, because from a brand perspective, I'd probably rank them in my top 8 overall in the conference. So for the fact that they're that low is startling.
And they would have been there last year, but they've lost a ton. And they've got a completely inexperienced head coach.
And how low is Washington on that?
And they lost their defensive coordinator, who's one of the best in the business. Washington, they are the most different team from one season to another in college football. They only bring back 2 or 3 starters. 2 or 3 starters. Both sides of the ball.
Those are the 2 teams they get from the Pac-12. I know. I mean, they
lucked out.
They did. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, imagine if somehow Washington had retained DeBoer and all those guys had been a year younger, and Chip Kelly stays at UCLA. I mean, like, those could be maybe the 2 toughest teams, even over Oregon and USC. If you, I'm just hypothetically here.
I thought you were going to the entire league. Okay, yeah.
No. Other than opposite UCLA and Oregon, so that didn't happen. And I think Maryland's going to be difficult on the road, but they're entering a new era with a new quarterback, and Wisconsin's a question mark. I think they're a dark horse for me. The divisions. It's not like Iowa fans have to loathe Wisconsin as a division player, but they are a dark horse to me as a team that could maybe be a lot better than we thought. Maybe a 9-3, 10-2 team if things go right. I haven't looked at their schedule.
Now, that said about UCLA, because of the way Iowa plays, do I expect them to go out to the Rose Bowl, a cross-country trip, and just have a cakewalk? No, it'll be Iowa will beat them 17-13.
I mean, maybe Iowa tramples on Washington at home. I just have to think that a national championship team from last year, or national championship appearance team, has the depth and still the brand that they reloaded enough to be competitive. I just can't imagine they're going to drop that much.
No. Yeah, I think they'll go 6-6.
That's a big drop. That is a big drop. And obviously it's going to be fascinating. How does Iowa compete in Columbus? That's one of the big storylines for me, because they were just so bad out there 2 years ago. I watched the highlights of that. I pulled up the full game. Somebody posted that on YouTube the other day. I pulled up the full game the other day, Iowa-Ohio State 2022, just to see the first play of the game. Do you remember what that was? The first play from scrimmage of the game. Spencer Petras takes the snap, drops back, rolls left. I mean, just straight. Didn't even think about it. Wasn't flushed out of the pocket. He just rolled straight left, threw it right to an Ohio State defender. So, I mean, it was just. And then later, hey, in spite of that, in the shoe, I think into the first quarter, Iowa was up 7-3 because Iowa, of course, the defense comes through, forces a field goal, and then Joe Evans, one of the most impressive plays of the season, maybe the most impressive play of the season. He ends up getting to CJ Stroud, just pops him, knocks the ball out. What does Joe Evans do? He just jumps right back up, grabs the ball as it's bouncing, Adrian Claiborne-esque from 2009, and trots into the end zone. It was such an Iowa moment, and yet we knew what was coming. We knew exactly what was coming.
Yeah, a very odd game, and I was used to playing odd games, but not like that odd game because they ran into a different type of opponent where they could limit them to roughly 300 yards and still give up 54 points just because, yeah, very odd game. And that's a game that I don't think Ohio State fans, I don't think general Big Ten or national fans in looking at Ohio State's schedule, and there's a lot of projections about them going undefeated, but I think it's more in line with 11-1. To expect anyone to go undefeated is a bit much, but not a lot of people really circling that game as one that could be an issue, and I don't necessarily agree with that.
You think it could be an issue?
Sure.
It's been a while since Iowa. When's the last time Iowa won in Columbus? You'd know better than I would. They've been obviously
I'll
really
come up with
competitive
that.
out there a couple times, but
Kirk's won twice, right? Total. I think he won in 04 and
sounds right. But they're
obviously
both in Kinnick.
17.
Both in Kinnick.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize until I was watching that game back the other day from 2022 that, Iowa hadn't played Ohio State since 2017. Both of those games, the last two matchups against the Buckeyes, both of those games have opened first play from scrimmage with an interception for the home team.
Yeah. Don't hold me to this, but I think the last time Iowa won in Columbus was 1987. Marv Cook scored a touchdown on like a 4th and 29.
So that was a Don Patterson. That was a Don Patterson team.
Yeah. Yeah. They scored with like 10 seconds left in the game, 29-27.
Okay.
Because Ohio State didn't lose a lot of games there from about 93 on. They weren't losing games for about 7 or 8 years, 9 years. And then Tressel showed up, and yeah, they weren't losing games then either. They've been on a pretty good run for 20 plus.
All
right.
Mark, do we want to real quick? Do we want to address the roster news from yesterday?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't relish this because I don't know the situation with the young man. Spoke to him briefly yesterday, but wasn't going to pry at him. It sounds like, according to Iowa, Aiden Hall, who's going into his second year out of Harlan, Iowa, great football community. He is not, as of right now, is not on the roster, so he's no longer with the team. That's all I reported yesterday. I had somebody get mad because the video wasn't long enough. I had a sponsor plug and it made up half the video. Well, I don't have anything else to report. The information I have is that Iowa's confirmed it. You can go on hockeysports.com and look at the roster, but Iowa's confirmed it's not a clerical error. He informed Iowa last week that he was departing. So he's still listed as a student at the U of I student directory. I wish the best for him, and we'll see what that means. I mean, maybe he ends up coming back, rejoining. Remember, they were above the scholarship limit, so they needed to get down below it, technically speaking. And so I don't know. Like, my mind goes a lot of different places. Could this be a situation where Aiden Hall has some stuff that he needs to take care of? He leaves, but because he's technically going to move to walk-on status, technically speaking, NIL could make up for. I mean, somebody's got to move to walk-on status. You see what I'm saying, Mark? Somebody's got to move to walk-on status. They're above the limit. So somebody's got to do that. He could rejoin. But again, I don't know the situation. I'm not going to pretend to know the situation. I know he dealt with some injury his first year, but that is the latest. And that, he was a scholarship player and a guy who had lost some weight. His new weight was listed last week. He had dropped, recently moved from linebacker to DB and had dropped 7 pounds or whatever it was. So hardworking kid. I remember at high school, he had offers from some military academies. I think he had a Minnesota offer, and hopefully he'll be able to continue his football career.